People say that in Clayridge, there was once a woman who kept the whole town awake for an entire summer, not because of crime, but because of love. Whenever the wind swept across the eastern ridge, the curtains would lift and sway, just like the hem of her dress back then. I remember her standing in the dusty sunlight, chalk on her hands, a quiet smile that never tried to prove anything. She came from the east with books in her suitcase, and something heavier than luggage. A heart that learned to love at the wrong time. Years have passed, and people still ask, who was she? But for me, she will always be the woman who taught us what it means to love for real, even if it meant carrying a lifetime of whispers. Clayridge, back in the late 1800s, was nothing more than a speck of dust between two red hills. There was nothing there except wind and dirt. The wind blew from sunrise to sundown, scraping rooftops, slipping through door cracks, whispering endlessly like it knew every secret this town tried to bury. People were used to dryness, cold, and silence. The whole town lived slow, like an old man breathing. No one talked about dreams, no one talked about love. They just worked, prayed, and waited for God to call them home. I was born into days like that, long and dull and quiet, until she came. Eleanor Whitmore, the woman on the wind-swept porch. She arrived on a gray afternoon right after a light mist of rain. A wagon stopped in front of the abandoned house beside the church. A woman stepped down, pale brown coat, an old trunk in one hand, and a bundle of books in the other. I was 12 then, standing outside the blacksmith shop across the road. I still remember the way she lifted her head, the wind catching her loose strands of hair, and how she smiled. It wasn't a happy smile or a sad one, just calm, as if she already knew how people would stare. They said she was a widow from Boston. Her husband died in a fire. No one knew why she left the comfort of the East for a dusty nowhere like this. No one cared either, except the children, who had never seen a woman arrive carrying books instead of a gun. She asked to open a school inside that old wooden house. The priest said yes, but the townsfolk weren't convinced. A woman teaching? They laughed. Who's going to teach her how to survive out here? Eleanor didn't argue. She swept the floors, cleaned the windows, and let the wind in. Every afternoon, I saw her standing on the porch, holding a cup of cold tea, looking toward the hills like she was listening to the wind talk. I still remember her first lesson. Light filtered through a thin white curtain, dust rising in the sun like threads of smoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it made every kid fall silent. She wrote 3 words on the chalkboard: truth, love, faith. Then she turned to us and spoke like a prayer. "Then if you know these 3 things, even the harshest life will still give you a place to stand." At the time, I didn't understand any of it. Maybe it was her voice, or maybe it was her eyes. But from that day on, I believed Clayridge had changed. After class, she stayed behind to clean the board. A gust of wind blew her loose paper out the door. She didn't chase it. She just watched it go and smiled softly. It was a smile that chilled me, not out of fear, but because it held both loneliness and pride. Soon the town began talking about her. Some said she was kind. Others claimed she was bad luck. Everyone agreed there was something in her gaze that made people afraid to look too long. She walked down the street quietly, her dress brushing sunlight, the wind following her like a loyal dog. Children ran to her calling, "Miss Eleanor!" She bent down and ruffled their hair, smelling faintly of lavender on her sleeves. And me, every evening from my own porch, I always saw the white curtain blowing out her window. At first I thought it was only wind. Later, I learned it was the sign of a soul that never fully closes. Some nights, I heard piano music drifting from her house, thin, wandering notes lost in the cold desert air. To this day, those notes still echo in my memory like a faint streak of light. Clayridge changed the moment she arrived, even if no one admitted it. She did not just teach reading and writing. She taught us how to live, how to look at the sky and be grateful, even when the ground was dry. How to love, even if love could get you condemned. Someone once said, "Some people do not come to stay. They come to put wind in your heart, and then they leave." Eleanor was exactly that. And even now, after decades, when everyone from that time is buried beneath yellow grass, every time the wind touches my porch, I still look up, half believing she will be there again, hand on the doorframe, dress brushing the wind, just like the first day I ever saw her. Eleanor came to Clayridge like a strange wind, quiet, unannounced. And from the moment she arrived, a town that used to live only by habit started to think again. She lived in a small wooden house at the end of the main street, a place that used to be Mrs. Carson's sewing shop. Every morning, people saw her open the door early, sweep dust off the porch, lay her books out under the sun, sleeves rolled up, small but determined. The wind would tangle her hair, yet instead of hiding from it, she lifted her face to the sky as if greeting the harshness. No one understood why a widow from Boston chose to start over in the Wild West. Some said she was running from her past. Others said she came to reinvent herself. Only I, the boy who sat in the last row of her classroom, believed she came for something else. Maybe deep down, she believed that knowledge and kindness could take root even in barren ground. Her classroom was simple. One long table, a few wooden chairs, a cracked blackboard, and the smell of old chalk. But every time she walked in, the room felt brighter, not because of the sunlight, but because of the calm she carried with her. Each lesson began with a reading. She spoke slowly, every word clear. Truth, love, faith. Those 3 words seemed like the 3 breaths she lived by. I remember how the warm light hit her hair when she leaned over my desk to correct my spelling. The smell of paper, chalk dust, and wind mixed into something I could never forget. I didn't know what love was back then, but I knew there are people you want to keep listening to, even if all they say are simple things. Eleanor didn't just teach words. She taught us how to see the world with compassion. One day I wrote something wrong. She didn't scold me. She placed her hand on the page and whispered, "Mistakes are part of learning. If you can recognize them, you are already halfway to the truth." I never forgot that. All my life, every time I failed, I heard her voice in the wind. But Clayridge didn't welcome difference. People began whispering, "She dresses too fine. She talks too much about kindness. A woman teaching boys to think will make them argue with their fathers." Eleanor heard every rumor, yet she never answered. Instead, she planted flowers around the classroom. Wild flowers of the West, the kind nobody cared about. She tended to as if they mattered. "They are strong," she once said. They don't need permission to bloom." I think she was just like those flowers. Beautiful, resilient, misplaced only because she dared to be different. Sometimes, after class ended, I stayed behind and watched her arrange books on the shelf. She touched each one gently, as if there were souls inside. That small gesture made me realize she was lonely. Not the loneliness of being left behind, but the loneliness of someone who carried too much to share, and no one patient enough to listen. Every afternoon, she sat on the porch with a cooling cup of tea, eyes fixed on the horizon where the sun melted into the prairie. Sometimes I would walk past, give her a quiet nod, and she would return it with a look so soft it felt like a touch. Just that was enough for me to feel something strange inside. Like an invisible message saying that some people, simply by existing, make the world less empty. One evening, the wind pushed her curtain open, and from inside came the sound of piano. The melody was slow, fragile, slightly uneven, like someone trying to remember a song they once knew by heart. I stood listening for a long time, until the music faded and only the wind remained. In that moment, I knew she was missing someone. Not someone here, but someone far away in the East. Someone who belonged to a chapter she could never reopen. Adults in town said she was different. But maybe Clayridge was the one that was wrong, because the town didn't know what to do with kindness that expected nothing in return. She didn't preach or try to convince anyone. She just lived like goodness was a natural instinct. And strangely, even the toughest men softened after speaking to her. They walked slower, talked quieter. That's how she changed Clayridge. Not through speeches, but through presence. She taught the town how to slow down and listen. And I, that boy in the back row, began to believe that kindness had its own sound. Many evenings, as the light faded, I saw her standing on her porch, hand resting on the doorframe, eyes deep like a well. Wind lifted the edge of her dress, carrying the scent of tea and chalk and some fragile longing I couldn't name. Years later, I finally understood. It was the look of someone who had loved, who had lost, and still had the courage to love again, even if the only way left was to teach others how to love. And Clayridge, without knowing it, had already begun to change. All because of a woman from the East who brought no miracles, only a heart big enough to light an entire barren land. Some things begin quietly, like a breath brushing against the wind. Nobody notices. Not until it grows strong enough to tilt an entire town. During those slow, dusty afternoons in Clayridge, people began seeing a man stop by Eleanor's old classroom. Samuel Grant, the largest cattle rancher in the region. A man of few words, sun-beaten skin, eyes hollow like someone who had stared at loneliness too long. He often brought spare boards or nails, sometimes a small pot of tea. "The roof leaks," he said simply. "I'll fix it." Eleanor nodded, offering a soft smile. She never asked for more. From then on, people saw them working on the roof together, sun overhead, hammer strikes mixing with the sound of wind. No one spoke, but something warm grew in that silence, something stronger than the light of a western afternoon. She would leave a glass of water for him on the step. He rarely drank it, but every time he accepted it, he lowered his head slowly, as if afraid to touch something he shouldn't want. One afternoon, I passed by the classroom. The door was open. Sunlight spilled across the wooden floor. She was writing at her desk. He stood just outside on the porch. Between them was a long stillness. A stillness so fragile I didn't dare breathe. Their eyes met, like two people who knew they had already gone too far to turn back, yet still too close to walk away. And that was when the rumors began. In Clayridge, wind travels faster than any horse, and gossip always starts in church. Father Whitaker, the same pastor who once approved her teaching, now looked at her with hard judgment. During Sunday service, his voice turned cold. Prideful knowledge leads to sin. Those who teach love and forget fear of the Lord bring darkness into this town. People exchanged looks, and they began whispering that Eleanor had enchanted Samuel, that he betrayed his wife, the sick woman who no longer recognized anyone. They called Eleanor the worst name a woman could receive in that time. Shameless. I heard those words in the saloon, heard them from men who had never read a single line she wrote. They laughed, spat on the floor, and spoke of her as if she were a stain to be scrubbed clean. I stayed quiet, because I knew some things are too real to debate. Their love was one of them. One night, rain fell. Rain in Clayridge was rare, almost like a miracle. Everyone stopped to watch it, except me. I saw a light still burning inside the classroom. Through the fogged window, two silhouettes stood close, one trembling, one bowing his head. Lightning flashed, then faded. And I knew they had crossed the line between what is right and what is necessary. The next morning, instead of church bells, the pastor himself appeared. He didn't look at Eleanor. He hammered a notice onto the door. To leave town before Sunday. This place does not tolerate sin. Beside the saloon, someone smeared fresh pine tar on the wall. The fallen teacher. Eleanor didn't step outside. She stayed inside that small room, door shut, lamp burning. Samuel didn't come. Rumor said his wife had collapsed, and he was forced to stay home to preserve the family's reputation. For 3 days, Eleanor was silent. No one saw her cry. No one heard her defend herself. I placed a small loaf of bread at her door and was about to leave when I heard the door open softly. Her voice followed, warm as embers after a dying fire. "Thank you, Thomas. Don't be afraid. People only do what they believe is right." I stood frozen, watching her shadow through the crack of light. Her hand trembled, but her eyes looked calm, almost peaceful. That evening, when the wind picked up, she stepped outside. She held a small piece of paper and set it on fire. Ash drifted into the wind. No one knows what was written. Some said it was a letter to Samuel. Others believed it was her final lesson, the one she never got to teach. That night, someone heard glass break inside the classroom. Maybe it was the oil lamp. Maybe her heart. The next day, she didn't come back. The door was kicked in, benches overturned. A small photograph lay on the floor, covered in dust. I picked it up. It showed a man I didn't recognize, yet his eyes mirrored Samuel's. The same sadness, the same resignation. Eleanor vanished for days. Some claimed she ran away. Others said the church forced her out. But I knew she was finding her own way out of the pain. Samuel aged overnight. People saw him sit in the saloon, hands empty, staring into nothing. A friend once heard him murmur, "If I am guilty of anything, it's leaving her alone in this world." After that, he talked less, smiled less, and whenever he rode past the old classroom on the eastern hill, he stopped and stared too long at the wind-blown doorway. Dust swallowed him whole. I was still the boy sitting in the back of her class. I didn't understand grown-ups, but I knew this. Some love, even when condemned, makes the world less cruel. And when I remember Eleanor's last day, I don't see scandal or shame. I see a woman who dared to live truthfully to what made her human. Clayridge never understood that. They saw sin. They didn't see love. And so, from love, she became scandal. But I remember the curtain rising in the wind and the sun reflecting on her hand the day she wrote the first word she ever taught us. Love. Clayridge didn't sleep that night. The wind shifted, carrying a strange burnt smell. By the time people ran outside, the fire had already devoured half the old schoolhouse roof. Someone shouted, but nobody dared get close. They stood around the flames, equal parts frightened and fascinated, as if they were watching their own conscience burn. I was there. I still remember the heat on my face, ash stinging my eyes, the sound of wood snapping apart like a heartbeat. The fire lit up the faces of those who once called her sinful. Now they looked down, unable to face the flames. Maybe because deep inside they knew. The fire wasn't just consuming wood. It was consuming the last shred of goodness left in Clayridge. Through the smoke, I saw her. Eleanor stood near the flames, petite and still, her dark coat caught in the wind. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just watched. The fire painted her face in flickering light, shaping a small smile that was both sorrowful and proud. I had never seen anyone stand that calmly in front of their own loss. Samuel arrived later, covered in dust, eyes red, fists clenched. He pushed through the crowd, ready to charge into the flames, but she stopped him with just a slight shake of her head. "Don't," she whispered, her voice lost in the wind. "Not to save me, not to save the school. Stay, to protect what's right." He stood there, silent. The fire cast a long shadow over them. Two people against the night, surrounded by judgment and smoke, like punctuation marks in God's unfinished sentence. When dawn came, the fire died. Only smoke and burnt wood remained. Among the ashes, someone found scraps of half-burned paper. One piece still held a line in her handwriting. "Love is never wrong." I slipped that charred scrap into my pocket. I kept it for years. It was the only piece of her I had left. The next day, Eleanor vanished. No one knew when she left. All that remained in the room was a letter on the table. The paper was white, the handwriting slanted, the ink blurred near the end. I do not ask to be forgiven. I only hope that the children of Clayridge will grow up able to love without fear. If anyone asks why I came, tell them. I came because I still believe people can be good. No name, just a signature. Eleanor Whitmore. I read that letter until the paper softened. Sometimes it trembled in my hands, like she had written it under the glow of the very fire that burned everything she had. Silence followed, heavy as iron. Samuel didn't leave his house for weeks. People said his wife, Mary, had worsened, unable to recognize anyone. He cared for her, but his eyes were vacant. Every morning, folks saw him ride to the eastern hill, staring toward the wind. Some said he was looking for Eleanor. Others said he waited for smoke to rise again, so he could believe she was still somewhere out there. Life in Clayridge returned to routine. Work, eat, sleep, hush. But laughter never returned. Even those who once threw stones at her door stopped looking each other in the eye when they walked past the ruins. One afternoon, I passed by the ashes and noticed something glinting in the soot. It was her silver hairpin, shaped like two small birds. One wing bent, one side scorched. I took it home and kept it in a wooden box, the way someone preserves whatever is left of a heart once touched. Whenever the wind rises, I still hear the ash rustle outside my window. It's not loud. It's the kind of sound only people who loved her could hear, like a whisper, "Don't forget me." And I didn't. No one truly forgot that fire. Because it didn't just burn a building, it lit an entire generation. Years later, someone claimed they saw a woman who looked like Eleanor in the north, teaching, hair streaked with gray, always holding a silver pen. No one knows if the story is true. I choose to believe it is. Because for people like her, dying is too small compared to what they leave behind. On nights when the wind sweeps through Clayridge, ashes rise in the air again, soft, weightless, like breath. And if you listen long enough, you can hear the sound of things left unsaid and the scent of a love that never got the chance to fade. 10 years passed, like one long breath. Clayridge changed, not fast, but steady, the way wind shapes rock. The wind was still dry, still carried dust across rooftops, but something about it felt softer, as if the land itself had learned to forgive. The old schoolhouse was nothing but a cracked foundation now. In its place stood a new building, small and simple, built from pine planks. Not a church, not a ranch structure, a school. People called it the Ridge School. And I, the boy who once sat in the very last row, had become the one teaching there. I never called myself teacher. In my heart, there has only ever been one teacher. Every morning before the children arrived, I wrote the same 3 words she once did. Truth, love, faith. Then I told them stories about a woman who taught Clayridge to look at one another differently. I never said her name, I just told them she came from the east, carrying a heart large enough to break walls built from fear. The children listened with bright eyes, as if the story were a fairy tale. They didn't know that sometimes fairy tales are just truths told with tears. Clayridge grew gentler. People stopped throwing stones at homes over rumors. Women were allowed to speak during Sunday service, allowed to read, allowed to learn. Nobody said Eleanor's name aloud. But I knew it was her who opened that door, paying a price only she fully understood. Samuel Grant still lived on the southern edge of town. His wife, Mary, passed during a winter night. People said he didn't cry. He just sat through the darkness holding a bundle of dried flowers. Every spring, he left flowers on the ridge where the old schoolhouse once stood. He would stand there, head bowed, letting the wind carry whatever words he couldn't say. No one asked. No one dared. Clayridge had finally learned to respect the kind of silence that hurts. Whenever I wrote on the chalkboard and heard the wind scraping the windows, I could hear her voice again. Learn to speak what you believe, Thomas, even if it means standing alone. One evening, I opened the small wooden box I kept tucked away for years. Inside was the burned scrap of paper I had taken from the ashes. The word love was still there, charred around the edges. The older the paper grew, the clearer that word seemed to me. Love, even burned, refuses to disappear. It only becomes something softer, something that lingers, like the faint smell of smoke on the coat of someone who left too quickly. The new generation grew differently than ours. They loved early. They loved recklessly. But they dared to love. Not the kind that hides in shadows. The kind that stands in sunlight without fear. One afternoon, my daughter Emma came to me. Her voice trembled, but her eyes shone. I want to get married, Pa. I love him. Years ago, those words could have shaken the entire town. Now, I simply smiled. My daughter could speak aloud what another woman once paid dearly just to feel. I placed my hand on her shoulder. If you truly love him, don't be afraid. Someone walked that road before you so you could say those words without shame. The wedding took place in the little church, surrounded by sunlight and flowers. People didn't whisper. They didn't turn away. They laughed, sang, and blessed the couple. I stood in the back and saw Samuel sitting in the last pew, hair silver, eyes damp. When the music started, he nodded quietly, as if at last something inside him had settled. The Clayridge wind that day wasn't harsh. It swept past the bride's dress and through the wooden benches, and I swear I heard something carried on the wind, soft as chalk against a board. Love is never wrong. I looked toward the ridge. The sunlight caught on the patch of earth where the school once stood. Wildflowers grew there now, small and white. The same kind she used to plant. They had grown back from ashes. No one tended them. They found a way anyway. I knew she was still here, not in body but in the ordinary things, in the laughter of children, in prayers spoken without trembling, in the way people looked at each other more gently. Clayridge had changed. The walls built from fear had fallen. Doors opened because hearts finally did. And every time the wind blows across the porch, lifting the curtain like it used to, I whisper into the quiet, "Do you see, Eleanor?" Clayridge finally learned how to love. 3 days after Emma's wedding, the wind changed. Clayridge returned to its familiar stillness, the kind of silence only places that once held fire can keep. I was at the Ridge School, cleaning up old books, when Samuel Grant walked in. It was the first time he ever stepped inside this school. He stood near the doorway, eyes drifting to the words written on the chalkboard. Truth. Love. Faith. "Your daughter," he said, voice rough. "That was a beautiful wedding. It reminded me of..." He didn't finish. Instead, He handed me an old envelope, yellow and brittle around the edges. "I received this years ago," he said. "It came to my house, but I never opened it. I hid it. I was afraid. But when I saw your daughter standing in that church, with a heart unafraid, I knew this was not meant for me. She would want you to have it." My name was written on the front, Thomas Reed. I stood there for a long time holding it, hand shaking. The scent of old paper mixed with dust and something like smoke. When I finally opened it, I felt as if someone softly whispered my name. Inside was a letter, no date. The handwriting was steady yet fragile, like it belonged to someone who had lost much, but never her gentleness. "Thomas, if you are reading this, it means Clayridge has changed. It could never happen overnight, but time is kinder than people. I am alive. I live far in the north, where snow is white and the wind is quiet. For a while, I thought I died with the old schoolhouse. But when I saw children laugh in a tiny town up here, I understood that there is always a place to plant what was lost. I teach again. I tell them about a place called Clayridge, where the wind is so strong only the steadiness of a heart can stand against it. I do not hate anyone. Not God. Not Samuel. Not the ones who threw stones at the door. They were not cruel, Thomas. They were afraid of what was different. And if I have a fault, it was believing courage alone was enough for love. Sometimes someone must pay with silence so others can love freely. Tell the children that I forgave Clayridge. They are the answer to the faith I carried. I heard about you, that you teach, that you write the same 3 words I once wrote: truth, love, faith. Thank you for that. You don't know it, but every time you speak of me, I get to live one more day. When the wind passes over the ridge, don't think it is just dust. It is only me stopping by to see if Clayridge has finally learned to love. Eleanor. I folded the letter and set it on the desk. My eyes stung. It wasn't sadness. It was relief. She lived. She taught. She forgave. She carried on with the same quiet grace she always had. She didn't try to prove herself right. She lived long enough to prove that kindness can't be burned down. I brought the letter to the church. Didn't speak. Just placed it on the pulpit, where anyone who came to pray could read it. So they would know that the woman they once called a scandal was the one who saved this town. That night, Clayridge was still. The moon was so bright, the dust on the ridge shimmered like silver flakes. I sat on my porch and listened to the wind. It wasn't harsh. It was gentle, like someone brushing hair away from my face. In that quiet, I heard her again. Not clear, not loud, just like the soft breath of the earth. Love is never wrong. I looked toward the eastern ridge. Someone had placed a small white stone there. I hadn't seen it that morning. A thin engravement read, "Eleanor Whitmore, she taught Clayridge to love." Below it, someone had left a few fresh wildflowers, the same kind she used to plant. They had grown again from ash. I knew exactly who placed them there. The same man who handed me the letter. The wind moved, petals trembled, and for a moment, I felt her smiling, finally free from every weight. I stood there and spoke into the breeze as if to a friend. They once called you Scandal. Now they call you the beginning. The wind didn't answer, but in the hush, I felt peace. Forgiveness. A love that had gone full circle. From passion to loss. From loss to silence. From silence to legacy. Clayridge no longer had her school, but every home taught kindness. No one spoke her name, yet everyone lived the truth she left behind. Love without fear. Before I walked home, I looked back at the ridge. The wind lifted the petals again, scattering them across the moonlit hill. And I understood. Some people don't leave. They just become the wind, so they can be everywhere, unburdened by the world that once judged them. People say that in the West, the wind carries everything away. Pain, hope, names no one speaks anymore. But sometimes, the wind brings someone back. Not in a body, in memory. Eleanor never died. She simply became part of the wind, teaching us that loving, even at the wrong time, might be the truest thing a person can ever do. And if this story made you pause for a moment, made you listen a little deeper, then stay. Stay for more journeys like this. Stories about people, about wind, and about the kind of love that doesn't need to be understood to be real. If Eleanor taught Clayridge to love without fear, maybe we can too. Subscribe, ring the bell, and show some love with a like, comment, share.